on the Louisiana abortion case, and you could see the desperation in the remarks and the behavior of those on the other side, those who are deeply wounded and troubled in their support for abortion. So we know Roe is falling apart. I do believe any effort to undermine the pro-life movement, every effort that can be made is being made at this moment. We also know FX is not a, let's see, how do I say this, a media network that's supportive of the pro-life movement. In fact, they are airing right now an FX Hulu event. It's called Mrs. America. It's a kind of a mini series featuring the life of Phyllis Schlafly, and it is complete falsehood. And this is their attempt, once again, to smear a woman who did incredible work throughout our nation and left an incredible legacy. Namely, Phyllis is responsible for stopping the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, the Everything Related to Abortion Act, from being ratified into our Constitution. And some folks are still very angry about that. So I think we have to understand what's going on right now nationally to kind of get perspective as to maybe why this documentary is coming out now, why they waited after Jane Roe's passing, after Norma McCorvey's passing, to push out this documentary when there's no way to correct the record or say that was taken out of context. So I think we need to understand Roe is falling apart. Those who support abortion are desperate to do whatever they can to undermine the pro-life movement's narrative and talking points. And it's going to continue. You're going to continue to see that desperation, especially if there is another Supreme Court opening. What you saw happen to Justice Kavanaugh is nothing compared to what I believe what will happen to the next Supreme Court candidate who is recommended for the Supreme Court by the president, no matter who that person may be. I think we also know that this isn't a faithful agent. It's a bad agent that we're dealing with FX because they already have a history of attacking dedicated pro-life leaders. So enough from me. I want you to hear from one of my mentors and one of my heroes, Father Frank Pavone, a priest for life. Because Father Frank, I think of any leader in the pro-life movement, you probably knew Jane Roe, Norma McCorvey the best. You received her into the Catholic Church, served as her spiritual mentor. I think you were even in contact with her the last days of her life. So I just wanted, maybe have a chance to ask you some questions about Norma, Father Frank. And then also, if you all have questions, please put them in the comments below, and I'll be checking the feed to ask Father Frank your questions. But I guess, Father Frank, let's start from the beginning. When did you first meet Norma?
Well, Kristan, thank you for doing this. It's always great to be with you, and thanks for all your great work. Yes, we got to know Norma through my friend Flip Benham, who baptized her. And Norma's whole story of how she got to that point in 1995, as you know, is told in her book, Won by Love. And that's when I met her, when she was baptized by Flip. In fact, I still have the fax that came over my fax machine that day saying, Norma is being baptized tonight, And so I sent her the greetings of Priests for Life, and I said, welcome to the pro-life effort, welcome to being a disciple of Christ. And I met her very shortly after that. I was doing my constant travels around the country and would come into Dallas regularly, where she lived. And she began to get together with me to come to masses that I would say there. She was not a Catholic, but she was, asking questions about it. But we started right away doing pro-life activities together and getting her, first of all, the healing that she needed, and secondly, to get her story out. So that was in the summer of 1995. And since then, as you already said, I became like a brother to her. We communicated constantly. Professionally and personally, public, private, the ups, the downs, the ins, the outs, constantly being together in various events and personal events too. When I was, for example, given the Proudly Pro-Life Award at the National Right to Life, a Proudly Pro-Life banquet that they held each year. Norma would come, and it was a mutually beneficial thing because she wanted to be there to support me, but then I wanted to introduce her. I would always say, Norma, you don't mind if I introduce you to the crowd, right? And people should see you. They should get a chance to meet you. So we had this constant relationship and communication over those 22 years, right up to and including the day she died. And then I presided at her funeral service and preached there and worked closely with her daughter to make all those preparations.
Mm. I think, Abby Johnson had a really, I think, profound Facebook post the other day. I saw it this morning when I was kind of checking up on social media. And, Abby talked about how she actually spoke to Norma, right, days before her death. And Norma reached out to her. Abby had never spoken to her before. And, wanted to talk to somebody else, she said, who had a big number, referring to, feeling the responsibility of the destruction of human lives. And Abby talks openly about how, she herself believes that number is 22,000 just for her when she was the director of that Planned Parenthood in College Station, and how she thought that all of these abortions, the 50, 60 million abortions that have been committed, she felt that responsibility, that she bared the brunt of that responsibility. So I don't think, I think that's a terrible burden for anyone. I can't imagine anyone having that burden. And that's what's so amazing to know, that she came home to the faith, right? That she became a Christian, that she realized that she could give those burdens, and that she could receive, grace. But can you talk about that? Like,
yes.
How did she feel, and how did that impact her?
Yes. Well, and this is also a good context for these documentary claims, that she was putting on some kind of act. You don't fake the kind of pain she lived through. Mm-hmm. And that's what we saw up close and personal, the pain. In other words, her journey over those 22 years was one marked by a constant striving to find the peace that only God can give, a constant wrestling with that terrible burden that you described so well. And we, just like Abby did, we led Norma through a process of healing that involved very intensive spiritual and psychological work, grieving work. This was not in front of the microphones, and in front of the cameras, and in front of the spotlights. This was in the quiet places, in confidential settings. This was where we walked through with her the grief and the tears and the burden and the anguish. But to show you how faith helped her from the very first day, the first time I met her, I said, so, Norma, you're the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. And here's what she said to me. She said, and I quote, "No, Father, I was the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. Now I am Roe no more. I am a new creation in Christ." She understood that we don't just turn to God for forgiveness and say, "Oh Lord, could you please, pardon me for what I did and please forget about it." It's not as simple as that. We go to him so that he can make us a whole new creation. That's what the gospel teaches us. And Norma took that to heart from the very first day. She knew that it didn't mean that the pain would go away. She knew that it didn't mean that there wasn't work to be done all her life to mend her life. But she knew that it meant she was a new person, and that the past didn't have to define her. And she had to keep going back to that literally each and every day to find the strength to go on.
Yeah. She definitely was very troubled by what happened in her life. And if you've read One by Love was one of the first books I read in the pro-life movement when I entered the pro-life movement, to understand her story. And I encourage you to read that story, to hear about Norma's life and what her life was like, and the decisions that led her to the point of, becoming Jane Roe, and then what happened to her life after that fact. That, this is a woman who her life, after kind of being used and abused by the abortion lobby. This is a woman who never had an abortion, but was used as a justification for why abortion should be legal in all 9 months. And she lived a very troubled life because of that. And I think that was very evident to those who met her and had conversations with her. Now, Father Frank, I was reading something the other day, and they say, well, she was pro-life, but we also have like a sworn affidavit, don't we, that she signed stating she had worked in abortion clinics following becoming Jane Roe, that abortion is a violent procedure, and basically making the case for why abortion is always the moral wrong. Do you know where and when she signed that affidavit, what it was used for?
Yes, she signed an affidavit in 2003, and to put this in context, she, aside from, of course, speaking publicly about her conversion and just sharing it constantly throughout the movement and on the media, what she also did was engaged in a legal effort to have the court actually reconsider the decision. This was called a Rule 60 or Motion 60 procedure that her attorney and our colleague Alan Parker led her through as her attorney. This was in conjunction also with the Mary Doe of Doe v. Bolton, Sandra Cano, whom we also all got to know, and who Norma and Sandra got to know each other. And it was a great consolation for them, because Doe v. Bolton, of course, was the companion case to Roe. And here you had the petitioners in both cases, technically the winners, both objecting to the very decision that they won. And so this was a motion taken together by the two of them, and they, actually Norma numerous times, both in religious settings and in secular government settings, swore to what she was attesting, that she wanted this decision to be overturned.
Mm-hmm. What kind of pro-life work did Norma, once she became pro-life, once she started going through the healing process, you all, obviously were spiritually kind of mentoring her through that. What kind of pro-life work did she engage in? So she had this legal battle to kind of get her name taken off, get the decision reversed. What other work did she engage in after kind of becoming active in the movement?
Well, we worked together to actually craft her ministry. As I mentioned, when she first met me, she said, "Oh, I am Roe no more." Well, that ended up becoming the name of her ministry. And she first started pro-life work together with Operation Rescue, which had moved in right next door to the abortion facility where she was working. And so together with them, that involved a lot of public witness on the streets, prayer in front of the abortion facilities, taking part in marches and rallies and protests, and that was a lot of the work she did in those early years. What it also involved was, actually, Norma loved to do this because she was actually doing this when she was working in the abortion facilities, and that was to counsel women who thought they needed an abortion. And this is the fascinating thing. When people talk about, was she really sincere? Was she really sincere? Well, people have to realize when she was on the other side and working in abortion facilities, she was talking women out of their abortions. This got her fired from 4 different abortion facilities. She said, "They threw me out because I was being too honest with the moms who were coming there." She said, "But I thought that we were there to serve women, and I was getting in trouble for serving women." But the point is that shows that was a kind of her pro-life work that then, of course, blossomed and continued. She loved counseling people who were, who felt pulled in that direction. Some of the other things she did, in fact, I have right here, for example, one of her early brochures. It has her writing here in the margins. She liked to get the story out in the printed word, and so she would distribute these flyers. We helped her distribute them. She started going out on the road speaking, and we played a role, of course, in interfacing her with the different pro-life groups that wanted to invite her to come. But she found it hard to articulate with all the emotional conflict she had within her. She often wasn't that great of a public speaker. And in fact, sometimes, when she would go out and be at different events, we would hear from the groups that were invited, say, Norma was rambling, and depending whether she was having a good day or a bad day, she would even be just sometimes incoherent. And that's where we found out that the best way to do a Norma presentation was to have a Q&A format. If she was clearly directed, "Okay, Norma, here's the question we want you to answer right now. What did you learn when you were working in the abortion industry?" You focus her on a question, she gave a focused answer. And then you just right away go on to the next one. And so we started helping her in that regard as well. So, and then of course the book publishing, the One by Love, as you mentioned. I also encourage people to read the book that came out before that, I Am Roe. And this was when, again, she was still on the other side, quote unquote. Gives a good history of what a troubled life she had and how many wounds she carried. But even then, and this is an interesting little vignette, she tells a story in her book. She was about to have the press conference that Gloria Allred, pro-abortion attorney in California, organized to announce to the world this was the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade, right? You know, the night before the press conference, she turns to Gloria and she says, by the way, I think abortion is wrong. And so Gloria said to herself, we better just let that one go by, and focus on what we have to do. Norma was never a believer in what Roe v. Wade actually says. Mm-hmm. That a baby, even a healthy baby, in the last months of development should not have the protection of the law. Norma didn't buy that. She didn't buy that. And that's why, she was actually against abortion before she was pro-life, before she came into our movement. And so it goes back a long time. But those are some of the things she did in the movement.
Where can students go, if they want to kind of see Norma? They can read Norma in the books. Like, do you at Priests for Life, do you guys have videos up of that interview of Norma and talk about, they can hear from her own life, maybe?
We sure do. As a matter of fact, we have a domain, normamccorvey.org. And there we have some video footage there. People will see the interviews, some of the interviews that we did with her. One of them is just like, 2 years after her pro-life conversion. It was in '97. Another one was in the early 2000s. Another one was in 2008. So they can see her at different stages of her journey. And there's also video footage there of the Mass where I received her into the church. You actually see me giving her the sacrament of confirmation and the remarks that we made at that Mass. And you see her, Janet was there right next to her in the front row, and you see her, waving to the congregation as they affirmed and applauded her. And this goes down, and I know that one of the if I can anticipate before we have to finish here, one of the key questions that people have in their minds is, well, what do you say if Norma herself is saying in this documentary, because we haven't seen it yet, right. This was all an act. I was really pro-choice. It was no act, I assure you. And people will say, yeah, but what do you do in the light of her actually saying that, if in fact that's what she ends up saying? Well, because we knew Norma. That's the way she got mad. That's the way she expressed her frustration. That's the way she vented her depression. We who knew her intimately knew never to be surprised at anything that came out of her mouth. I mean, I have texts from her. In fact, one of the texts was on one of the specific days in May of 2016 when she was being interviewed for this documentary. She was in a very bad state of mind that day, very bad. And the text I have demonstrate it. By the way, also the text that says that she was getting paid to do this documentary. People need to keep that in mind too. She writes to me. In fact, I put the text up on our friend Steve Ertel, put it out the other day on Life News. Norma said, hey, Father, I'm this guy from Australia who came down from New York is interviewing me, and I'm charging him, and I'm really happy about this because I'm going to get some good money from this. And earlier that day, the text she sent me said, I'm sitting here broke and extremely upset. I am frustrated with the pro-life people that aren't getting back to me, because she had, a number of people that had promised her things, information, and she wasn't hearing from them. And she expressed her frustration, and in the text that says, you know what, I've had it with this movement. I'm not part of you anymore. We knew to take that in stride, because that was Norma venting. A few hours later or the next day, oh yeah, I was in bad mood yesterday. Father, let's pray together. Let's go to the abortion mill. This was Norma. So what amazes me, Kristan, is the arrogance of people who will presume based on literally on sound bites, or based even on hours of video footage with a camera in front of her face, would presume that anything that could come out of her mouth during that video interview, that anything could somehow just brush away 2.5 decades of a journey of this woman, where when the cameras were off, bitterly wept as she wrestled with the guilt and the pain, and as she strove to get her message out that she wanted these babies protected. Nothing erases that, nothing. And that's why I want our students, and I want everybody really to be reassured. This woman, very, very erratic at times, very, very up and down. But when you walked with her on that journey for almost a quarter of a century, you came to learn where she always landed and where her core convictions really were. And they were exactly with us, on the side of life, on the side of God, on the side of this movement.
That's right. You know, you and I signed a letter with a number of pro-life leaders who had known Norma and worked with her to, ask for the full video footage that, we want to see the full footage. And it's very unfair that they waited, years after her passing to release this footage, knowing that there's bias there, that there's definite bias in the Vice producers, the documenters, and that Norma's not here to defend herself, to say, wait a minute, that was taken out of context. I was having a bad day. I was mad that somebody wasn't getting back to me. When you were talking about that, I mean, I think about the bad days I've had in the pro-life movement of saying, all right, I'm done with this. I'm this is too much. And you vent, you get upset, and then you get back to work. And I think every single one of us have moments in time like that. But then you have to realize if a camera is there, and that person behind the camera has a narrative that they're trying to weave, they can use that, and that can be very useful. I can imagine if someone was following me around every day, it could be very bad. So how can those who didn't know Norma, how can they respond right now if their friends are on Facebook posting like, this just proves the pro-life movement's a lie, and the pro-life movement just has been lying this whole time? What do you think is the response that pro-life students, those who didn't know Norma, can use to really kind of, I think, neutralize the conversation and give them, if one, we don't know what the truth is. We weren't there in that room when that conversation was being had. We haven't seen the unedited raw footage, but then also be able to use it to launch into a discussion about really what's being discussed, which is, should abortion be legal?
Yeah. Well, I think that an interview and a conversation like we're having right now can be their best defense. In other words, students, the younger people in our movement who did not know her, who perhaps never even saw her in person, need to know we did. And we knew her intimately. It wasn't just that we were with her or we heard her speak. I mean, when her friends, myself included, were, every inch of her journey and of her life. When she would get, she liked stuffed animals, and when she would get a new stuffed animal, she would send us an email and a text. Look at this stuffed animal that I got. I mean, that's to say the level of transparency that she had with us was intense. So people need to be able to respond by saying, look, I didn't know her, but I know people who did. She was not a hidden figure. She was not, a distant figure. She was in this movement where she entrusted people with her deepest secrets, and you can't fake the pain that she had. And that to me is the biggest part of this whole journey, is that quest for healing. You don't break down and weep when nobody else has got cameras on over something that you're not sorry for. The sacrifices she had to make, the things she did on her own initiative to keep growing in the pro-life effort. It wasn't just about us saying an interview or giving a speech. It was about the striving that she did each day to become more pro-life. The people she would try to reach, like I mentioned before, that people that were thinking about having an abortion, the lives she actually saved, to go out of her way to reach them and convince them not to abort. You don't make that stuff up. Being willing to face that darkness by going on yet another retreat, or having another counseling session, or seeking out another Bible study. She'd be doing these things on her own initiative, and not to mention enduring the ridicule and enduring the backlash that she got, not only by becoming pro-life and by becoming Christian, but she also suffered quite a bit by becoming Catholic, because then there were some who had got to know her in the movement who criticized her for that. And yet again, all on her own initiative. I never said to her, hey, Norma, you should think about being a Catholic. Never once. She asked me questions about the faith, and then she had a real independent streak in her. And, she reached out and she got the help of other people. But if you tried to control her, she pushed back, And so it was always, Father, this is my decision. Here's what I want to do. And those decisions that she constantly made out of the depths of her own heart and spirit were always in the direction of greater healing and greater saving of lives. And that's her. So the response in a nutshell is, don't try to tell us who Norma was. We know her. And the students can say, we as a movement, we knew her. It wasn't just someone that said, I'm pro-life. We knew her.
Mm-hmm. Is it fair to say, Norma was complicated and she lived a troubled life? I think it's fair to say that. I think if you're having, I'm just responding to some of the comments here. I think it is fair to say that she was complicated and lived a troubled life, and she suffered because of that. Being used in that way with the Roe v. Wade decision. It's something that forever, if any single one of us had been used in such a way like that to justify 60 million abortions, the ending of 60 million human beings, I think every single one of us would struggle with that. And it's something that I think that it becomes a lifelong struggle at that point as well.
You know what I would say, Kristan? Her wounds were complicated, and that made her a complicated person, but her wounds were complicated. She herself had a bluntness, a directness that was sometimes offensive, sometimes downright scary, and sometimes so helpful to the cause she was espousing. And you may remember the story, which she was on one of these panels with other pro-abortion leaders in some kind of congressional hearing. And all these other leaders introduced themselves. Eleanor Schmiel was there, and Patricia Ireland, and some of these other folks. So they get to Norma and they say, and your name, ma'am? Well, I'm Norma McCorvey. Now, I'm the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. These other ladies, they just wish they were, And it's like they were like Norma, what are you trying to say? She did not tolerate insincerity, posturing. She had a very, very, at her core, she had a very direct simplicity and bluntness and honesty. But her life was complicated by all the terrible wounds, terrible childhood. Again, if people read I Am Roe, and then they read Won by Love, and then they watch, like you say, the various videos and articles about her, you're going to learn a lot from that. But, I also want everyone to know, myself and the other leaders in the movement who accompanied her on this long journey, we're available. We're available to you. We want to continue telling her story. And, the day she died, she made us promise, don't stop telling my story. Don't stop defending gun. The day she died. And, we're going to certainly do that. All of us together continue to draw strength from her example.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you, Father Frank, for taking time today to kind of share, your stories of Norma, your relationship with her, and hopefully answer some of your all's questions. I'm going to encourage you to check out Priest for Life's normamccorvey.com website. Get those videos, share those, as a kind of a response to what we're going to be seeing tomorrow when FX releases this AKA Jane Roe documentary. I think this is to be honest with you, I think it's a very sad situation that, we know the abortion industry is a complete lie, and everything they do is based on a lie, that the preborn child is not a human being, that child doesn't deserve rights, and that abortion is absolutely nothing, and that it'll actually solve your problems, which we know it won't. They lie and they manipulate every single day for the advancement of their cause, and they did that with Norma. They did it, leading up to the Roe case. They did it right before her death, and certainly after she became pro-life, and now they're doing it after her death. So I think this is a very, very sad situation. But you can kind of spread the truth about who Norma McCorvey was, what she did, how she lived her life, by spreading those videos, talking about what and what other, the folks who knew Norma, their honest reactions and their relationships with her. So thank you all for joining me today. And thank you, Father Frank, for coming on, answering your questions. Father Frank, how could folks best, if they have other questions, can students, I know you're active on Instagram, which you comment on some of my things every once in a while. Is that the best way for students to get in touch with you, is to DM you?
Yes, and both my Twitter and Instagram addresses are FR Frank Pavone, as all one word, FR Frank Pavone. And I do like and comment on a lot of your stuff. You, Kristan, are an inspiration to me too, as well as countless others. Thanks for all your witness and your great work. But yes, FR Frank Pavone, let's connect on social media.
Thank you all so much. Bye.